I'm Chris Stafford, and this is Season 1, Episode 6 of AART, the podcast about female artists.
If you don't feel it, I'll make you feel it. I'll show you what I mean. If you don't feel it, I'll make you feel it. I'll bring you to your knees. If you follow me.
Hello, and welcome. If you're tuning in for the first time, thank you for spending some time with us to learn more about female artists. If you missed the first few episodes of Season 1, you can go back anytime and download those, and I hope you'll subscribe to the AART Podcast and catch up with the many interviews that we have planned here to bring you more women artists. We'll explore their journey and how they got started, their inspiration, their aspirations, and whether they're amateur or professional, and whatever medium they work in, too. My guest this week is Suzie Baker from Shenandoah, Texas. Suzie is a professional oil painter and a plein air teacher. Now, growing up, Suzie was that child who was always drawing, although she began her career in advertising. And while Suzie's adopted parents were not artistic, her birth father and grandmother were. It was 2008, when she was in the Middle East with her husband, that she started painting full-time, eventually establishing herself as a representational artist. The motivation is Suzie's overarching goal to continuously improve her abilities as an artist, to express her response to the world around her in ever more fascinating and innovative ways. She says, "I hope I will be painting until I'm an old woman. I think in this life you can only be truly good at one thing or maybe a handful of things. The idea that I might have another 35 or 40 years to paint and explore my own personal creative direction is a compelling notion." Nowadays, Suzie divides her time between painting and teaching plein air around the country. Suzie, welcome. Thank you so much for joining me.
Wonderful. Great to be here, Chris.
Well, this, as you know, is a brand new podcast, and we are trying to highlight as many female artists as we can. And you've been in the business quite a while now, so I'm very interested in your story because you are a full-time pro, aren't you?
I am, yeah. Have been on the painting side of things for about 15 years or 16. And before that was in advertising because that was a pragmatic choice. Right.
Well, let's start at the beginning, shall we? Because I think that's always fun to hear about people's childhoods and their early influences. And I'm wondering if you were that child in school that was always drawing on something.
I was definitely that child. I remember in one of my earliest art memories was in like first or second grade. I had a coloring page with an owl on it, and I decided that if I shaved my brown crayon and glued it down, it would look like feathers. And I was very proud of myself. I think probably my teacher saw the litter of crayon detritus around my desk and thought differently, but that was, and that was always me, drawing, sketching, forgetting that I was supposed to be listening and talking to my neighbor. It was asterisk, Suzie talks too much in class on my report cards, but probably could have also been doodles too much. So,
now, did you have any influences, in the family? Were any other family members that way inclined and encouraging you at that point?
Well, I had a grandmother that was artistic, and now I'm also adopted, so this was my adopted family grandmother. But I really didn't. Unfortunately, I wasn't raised with her influence. She lived far away, but she had quite a list of accomplishments when she was a young woman, and including studying at the Fontainebleau School in France when she was in her 20s. But she sort of followed the traditional path of women once she had children, and then really didn't have any career to speak of, other than when she would do things with women friends that were crafty. Hers looked like artwork, and everybody else's probably look like crafts. So, and I have some things of hers that I'm really proud of, but unfortunately she died when I was in junior high and kind of before I was old enough to appreciate that I could have asked her a bunch of questions about that experience and her life life journey. So, but I did meet my birth parents when I was in my late 30s, early 40s, and he was creative, and I have a full-blood brother who majored in advertising as well. Well before knowing me that I did that. And my son and daughter also majored and graduated with degrees in, communication arts and cinema arts. And so in that regard, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, and including, genetically. So I thought that was pretty interesting.
Yeah, it is, isn't it? Because it's there in your ether, so to speak. Now, did you have any influences as a child or as a young adult in terms of both male or female artists, both masters and contemporary? Was there any influences that was developing your style?
Right. So from the standpoint of visiting museums or seeing art in art news or magazines, not really. I grew up in rural Louisiana to a single school teacher. We didn't have a lot of disposable income, though, my mom was very wise with her money. But she was a college graduate, and I went to a high school that had an art teacher that made a art for me, so I could have 4 years of art in high school. And his name was Ken Tracy, just a great, encouraging teacher. When I graduated, he was a potter, and he gave me another artist a piece of pottery, and with a note that said, all artists are also collectors, and sort of started my collection that way, and as well as giving me a piece of his pottery. And so he was very influential. And in his class, I came across the work of Maxfield Parrish that I admired a lot. And, but he always had us drawing from life, drawing still lifes. And then when I went to my appointment with the guidance counselor at my high school, Grant High School in Central Louisiana, she asked, are you going to college? And I said, well, yes. And she said, well, what are your interests? I said, well, it had to be art related. I thought it was going to be architecture, but I ended up doing advertising. And, I think I chose that route just because there were no examples of what it looked like to be a vocational artist. I just didn't see that. Certainly not in my realm of influence, or, that would influence me in rural Louisiana. And so, and also growing up sort of paycheck to paycheck, the notion that I would choose being a studio painter with no idea of how you make money doing that, it didn't even occur to me. But I went to Louisiana Tech, which at the time, and from 88 to 92, had an excellent art department. My guidance counselor was right. She told me, well, Tech had a good art department. And I said, okay, Tech it is. And, and humorously, that was my research for where I was going to go to college. And having two college graduates myself now, and the pain and the weeping and gnashing of teeth of filling out applications, and the stress of where you're going to go was just, it was fantastically great, but that I just sort of felt like I sort of threw a dart, and picked, but got very lucky and had lots of professors, drawing and color theory and oil painting. And I had a professor, Peter Jones. I took, even though my major was communications or graphic arts, which was a really great program, but every opportunity I had to take oil painting courses or painting courses, I took. And Peter Jones, who has since retired, was the painting teacher, and we did, everything from still life to outdoor painting, which we just called painting, not plein air painting, as it's known now, and figure painting, and it was all from life. And so I got this really great instruction in college, including a course in Rome. I took a Tech Rome program and walked around with my grandmother's paint box and would sit on a stoop or a bench or the ground and do little paintings on loose canvas taped to boards all around Rome. So I had a really great foundation, even as a teenager and early 20s.
What kind of a child were you, Suzie? How would you describe your personality as a child, and then we'll fast forward to how it's influenced you and the artist that you've become. But how do you reflect on your childhood and the kind of personality when you were going into art in those early days?
Well, the asterisk, Suzie talks too much, was definitely something that was in my, just on probably every report card, I'm sure. I would just forget. I would forget that I was supposed to be listening, and I would start talking to my neighbor because I have, my kids both have ADHD, and when they were young, I would be reading books on that to help them. And I would be like, oh, this explains so much. So very, all over the place, a lot of energy, sort of where words are many, transgression is inevitable kind of kid. And, I think I've gotten better with that as I've gotten older and more mature, but, I'm sure I still stick my foot in my mouth occasionally. My husband is very patient. And, but I think also sort of an irrational self-esteem, which I like to say you need as an artist, because we are constantly, the work of our hands becomes visible to people, and we need to be able to deal with failure and deal with, doing things experimentally that don't work out so well and still show up for more. So you have to have the humility that allows you to push yourself outside of your wheelhouse, and the self-esteem sort of in tandem. And I think by nature I had a little bit of that, where you couldn't tell me that I couldn't do something, and also this sort of look at me, which might have been a little obnoxious growing up, but was sort of part of my personality. And then to my painting style, I had this really sort of a seminal, assignment in college, if that's the right word, where we had lots of drawing, color theory, painting from life, in a series of courses. And then kind of towards the end of one of the quarters at Louisiana Tech, my professor, Peter Jones, came in with these just really simple still lifes of some flowers that he cut from his garden in a glass. It was probably like a tall jelly jar or something. And he put a light background behind one and a dark background behind the other. And we have 30 minutes to paint them start to finish. And so, you showed up with your canvas, with your fully loaded palette, and he starts a timer, and your right brain just sort of runs off screaming because your left brain is just recording shape and value and color and negative shape. And 30 minutes later, I sort of backed up and I thought, well, I think that's the best painting I've ever done, because I didn't have the ability to sort of over analyze. And now the asterisk here is that we did have all of that instruction in sort of our artistic backpack to call upon. It wasn't the first assignment out of the hatch. And so for me, even still, that sort of responsive alla prima exercise informs my painting even today. Not entirely, because I'm always wanting to do things that are experimental. dry brushing and things that break away from that responsive, responding to the environment or to the thing that's in front of me. I do like to mix it up, use different surfaces, different techniques. But I would say if you looked at my website, you would see that sort of responsive nature coming out in my work. Even today, what is that, 30 some odd years later. So
you have a tough skin for the critics.
I think you have to. But I would also say that the community of artists that I surround myself with are a very encouraging group. Like the sort of mean behavior that we see so rampant on social media writ large is not the behavior of the average artist community, both social and in person, social media and in person. We call it, my brother is quite a good photographer, Rob Greer, and he calls it the poop sandwich, but not that word. And where you have the piece of white bread, the poop in the middle, and the other piece of white bread when you're giving a critique, because we need our ego massage just a little bit, AKA you're not a complete failure, but here's the thing that you might want to address in your painting, followed by another, but this area is particularly nice. And that is what I try to do when I give critiques. The people that I really value their opinion. I have some really great, talented art friends, Amy Erickson, Lynn Boyer, Jane Hunt, a group of people that I can sort of, wiggle my painting in front of and say, okay, I've been looking at this too long. What am I missing? Brienne Brown, people that I completely trust their assessment and their handling of me, and because they're going to do what's best for me in my painting. So, yeah, I think we have to have that irrational self-esteem, that tough skin. But, we also need to find people whose opinion we value and trust when we're asking for that feedback. Yeah.
And I would imagine then, as a teacher, you would be very sensitive to that with your students.
Well, I try to be. And when I have a workshop and I'm approaching somebody at their easel, out, whether that be out in the field or in the studio, I like to ask them, because I've been on the receiving end of that too. I've taken some really great workshops with the likes of Michael Lynch and Jill Carver. And, I sort of know what I'm capable of. And generally I've picked a teacher that has something that I feel like I'm lacking. And I kind of want to get my painting to that place that, okay, Suzie knows how to do this, but now what would you do from here? And so if I'm approaching a student's canvas and they're sort of early in my rotation, I don't want to assume that they're floundering, because they may already have something in mind where they know where they're going. So I'll ask them, tell me about what you're doing, and do you have questions for me, rather than just sort of launch into instruction where things that they probably already know. And some students may say, I am really a beginner, and how do I start? But I would say 80% of the people that take from me have already been, whacking their brushes against canvases for a while. And I'll also ask them, would you like me to tell you what I think, or would you like me to show you? Because some artists really want to try to do it themselves, and some are, really, anxious just to turn those brushes over to me to see how I might handle it, how I might mix the pile of paint or hold the brush or, push the brush into the canvas so that they can learn from that. So that's sort of, in a nutshell, my approach when I'm in the field with a painter. And then I will be attending the Plein convention in Denver this year, and another artist, Mark Shasha, and I will be doing a stage critique of artists who turn in their work. And then that's sort of a totally different ball of wax there, ball of string, ball of wax, is that a thing? And we'll be looking at paintings that are presumably completed and, discussing what we see in that, both from a positive and a, you might consider changing aspect.
So that is your painting, your teaching life. And let's go back to your own painting life, because you've combined the two, obviously. And how much time are you able to spend then in your studio these days with your other commitments, Suzie? And what are your goals at this point in your career?
Okay, so what we artists, professional artists in particular, get asked, do you paint every day in your studio? And I would love to say that I do, but the reality is that as a professional artist, you are also, head janitor and CEO of your own business. And, excuse me, I'm getting over a cold. So there are times where I need to give attention to my books, to my inventory system, to communication with collectors and sending out newsletters and posting on social media, which I don't do nearly enough. There are times, too, where I will pay a studio assistant to sort of bring a backlog of things up to date in my I use a artwork archive, which is an online organizational system of paintings, because I do a lot of painting, and one of the sort of fields that I paint in a lot is plein air events, and you can go on my website at any given point and see all of the events and workshops that I am participating in any given year. And it's pretty extensive. My season my outdoor painting season just started in March, and I flew out to Catalina Island painting in preparation for a show in the fall called The Wild Side. And I flew home and immediately got in my car and drove to Florida. I live in north of Houston, Texas, and did a teaching event of Plein Air South, and then Forgotten Coast Plein Air, and then up to Charleston for the Oil Painters of America National Convention, which I'm on the board with. So back to back plein air and otherwise events. And that doesn't wear me out. I'm a extrovert. As long as I have time to be sort of in my own headspace, I can be very productive. And I found that if I can, when I load my van or pack my suitcase for events that are specifically geared to painting, for me, that really works, because that is the only thing that I'm doing. I'm not doing my laundry. I'm not watching Netflix. I'm not doing my books. I am just sort of doing triage on my email inbox. My apologies to people that are waiting my reply. I'm just getting around to that via email, but I just get up early in the morning and I just start painting. And in fact, my husband, he went to the Smoky Mountains with me last year for their first plein air event, and he was just working remotely. He's an engineer, and he's used, when I'm at home, he'll see me sort of sleep in and get my coffee and sort of amble out to the studio and get started around 10 o'clock. And when I was in the Smoky Mountains, like, I wake up at sunrise, and he said, I've never seen you like that. You like wake up and you've got your game face on, and I didn't even know that I was like that. I knew I did that, but that I would have this different demeanor. So anyway, but then my year sort of runs through, about the middle of October. Sometimes I'll have a late event in November, like a workshop. And then I'm sort of in my studio for the winter. And that is where I'm playing catch up. I am finishing up my books for the year. Sometimes I'll do a winter workshop in my studio, but I like to use that time, up until March to do some experimental things, to revisit things that I've done in plein air and do something sort of a larger studio piece. This past September, I traveled with just other professional women artists. We went out to Paris, where none of us were concerned about teaching or doing big pieces. We were just there to enjoy each other's company, paint do a drop-in session at a figure painting. I forget the name of the place, but that's been around for hundreds of years, and just paint for ourselves. And I'll try to do those sorts of things in the winter. So rather than saying, what my average day looks like, it's more like this is what my average year looks like.
Yeah, I was really looking more at where you were balancing your studio time for your own painting with everything else in life, and if that balance is meeting the goals that you have as an artist, and what are you looking for? What are you looking to get out of what you do now, as well as what you're giving?
Well, that's a really, really good question, because I don't ever want to stop progressing as an artist. And there are some parameters that are the nature of plein air painting that aren't necessarily good for progressing as an artist. There are things that you can do to a dry painting that you can build up over weeks and months that you can't do in a plein air painting that is due at the end of the week, to put in a frame. And actually, let me back up just a little bit for those that are listening that don't know what the plein air world looks like. So there are events all over the country, mainly in the United States, usually in beautiful places like national parks and Telluride and Maui, where artists either apply or are invited to participate from all over the country, and we converge for a week. It's usually to raise money for some not-for-profit. We get our blank canvases stamped and we paint all week. And at the end of the week, we turn in our framed paintings, and there's a competition, show and sale, and usually a quick paint, about a 2-hour quick paint, where people can come and watch us paint. And it's really just a wonderful and exciting environment to be in. But you are, we don't work from photographs. It's expected that you paint, from life, or you adjust that painting based on what it needs as a painting, but not from photographs. The nature is plein air. So what I try to do in order to continue to grow as an artist in that environment is think about how can I bring my studio mentality to the plein air world, and vice versa. How can I bring that sort of plein air responsiveness into my studio work, which might have the tendency to get, overly rendered, or I like to say constipated in the studio. The freedom that I get in plein air, I can lose if I'm not careful in the studio. And one of the ways that I do that in order to keep my goals of progressing is I might try to do a much larger piece, a more ambitious piece in plein air, in a time that is challenging, like a sunrise or a sunset, by returning to the same location at the same time in order to continue to work in that sort of light. And if I see a scene, for instance, I was just out in Forgotten Coast in Apalachicola, Florida, and there's just a beautiful dock scene of shrimp boats out at a place called the Mill Pond. And I observed it one night at sunset. I marked the time. I have an app that shows me where the sun is going to be at any given time, or the moon might be. And I plan that and draw out that painting one night. And then I show up the next night with my canvas prepared, maybe a tone. And I draw that scene in the hour leading up to when the light was going to do what I wanted it to, so that I can respond to that color, if that makes sense. And then return the next day if I need to do more work on it. And that allows me to sort of circumvent the negative aspects that are inherent in the rules, quote unquote, of plein air painting.
So, of course, you're mostly working in oils, but you said you like to explore all the time and work in other mediums too.
Yeah, I definitely am primarily an oil painter. But my sketchbook is often with me wherever I go. So that's, pen, pencil, mechanical pencil. And that's just keeping your drawing fresh. If I can just put in a little plug here for if you are a beginning artist, I see a lot of people who have had their career in something else. They've loved art, and here they're approaching retirement, or maybe they're retired and they're ready to start painting. And, they might take my workshop or another artist's workshop. And, here they're faced with sort of a full complement of painting, brushes, canvas, and it's very overwhelming. And my encouragement to you would be to maybe take a drawing course, or there's a book that I really love to recommend, and it's Richard E. Scott, Drawing from Square One to Sketching from Square One to Trafalgar Square. And it's just a really great book that leads someone through some very basic drawing up to more complex drawing principles, so that you sort of have that to build on, because that drawing is fundamental to everything you build on. So going back to, drawing and sketching, and we have some great drawing portrait groups in my area that I'll show up at. And sometimes I'll bring my charcoal and drawing, sometimes my oil paint. And then if I'm traveling, just like with my family, who doesn't want to sit and watch me paint for 2 hours, I might bring a little watercolor set, something that is easier to tote around. But primarily primarily oil paint. When I was in Paris with my artist friends, we stopped by the Sennelier shop on the Seine, and I grabbed a bunch of oil pastels and would start my drawing with my painting with that, which I found interesting and a good start, as opposed to just sketching in with my brush or with a piece of vine charcoal. So experimenting. And to your question about goals, my goals change over the years. When I was first starting, I had all sorts of goals related to my digital life and my brand and getting out there so that people would know me and as a painter and trust me as a guide for if they were to take a workshop from me. So you have to give them reasons to, of why why buy your painting, because when people buy a painting, they're not just buying this painting that they respond to, but they're also buying you as an artist. And, and part of that is getting your digital house in order and, getting out on social media with good work that people respond to. And so those goals are, I have all those digital things set, and they need babying, which I have to do regularly, but it's nothing like the Herculean effort of getting that all set up to begin with. And now my goals are more, how do I continue to progress? And the wonderful thing about being an artist, and a few years ago, our Oil Painters of America National Convention, we had Sherry McGraw and David LaFell, and are speaking to them. And David is, he might be in his 90s now. Ned Mueller is in his 80s. John Stobart, who we just lost, was, I think, 93, 94 when he passed away, but still vital artists producing wonderful work. And, we as a community still revere our octogenarians because you don't ever quit learning and growing. And, the Japanese artist Hozukai sort of famously said he never did anything truly good until he was 50 and, started being kind of happy with his work in his 70s. And when he reached 110, he really will have accomplished, what it was like to be an artist. And, his tongue was kind of in his cheek, but we kind of relate to that because we can constantly learn and grow. And it's not sort of like becoming a software engineer where if you rest on your laurels for a year, you're left behind. We build on what we know every year. And I think that's wonderful about our little field of being an artist.
How do you value your art now? I imagine it was difficult in the early days to value your own art, but how do you value it today?
I can walk you through how I started and where I am right now. And I think that would inform that question for your audience, regardless of where they are. So, as I said, I was in advertising and I worked as an art director in ad agencies until, my last day of work was in 97. And I knew my last day of formal, me working for somebody else. And I knew what they charged for my time. And at the time it was about $75 to $100 an hour. And I would, keep my time as we were bidding jobs. So from the professional world, I was familiar with my time is worth something. My work product is worth something. And here's generally how much time it takes me to do that something. So I had that in my mind as a professional. And I thought, as a professional, if I am going to translate from, and then I began to pick up design clients on my own. And I always sort of painted on the side, think of it as me doing 70% advertising, 30% oil painting. I always kept that up because it was in me and I loved it. But my invoices were for design work. So when I wanted to hit that reset button and start painting full time, I owed it to myself to not undercharge for my work. And at the time, I was just sort of limping into what it meant to be a painter. And I had this sort of backlog of smaller plein air pieces. Think of them as sort of 8x10 oil paintings that I had done, traveling with other artist friends. And I started, I'm not necessarily recommending this, but I started a little Etsy shop. And for me at the time, I think my 8x10s were a couple $100. And I did sort of that equation of how long did it take me to do that? What is this worth? What does it cost me to ship it? And all of that needed to be in my calculus for pricing my work. In addition to the fact that what you can charge locally and what you can charge in an environment, which is sort of a craft environment like Etsy, was lower than, where I wanted to end up in galleries at prestigious events and shows. So at the time, that money was just rolling right back into my development as an artist. I would put it back into workshops, into art supplies, because I like to joke that the more money you spend on art supplies, the better painter you are. And really, I would make a small profit every year, because I was also putting money into entering competitions, American Impressionist Society, the Portrait Society, Oil Painters of America was a big one. And I would get into local shows, and as long as I was only entering local shows, I felt like I was a pretty good painter. But then I started getting into national shows, and I'd go to the national shows and I'd see, oh my, where I think of myself as an artist versus what the artists on a national level are producing. I had a lot of work to do. And I began getting the catalogs from these shows, AIS, OPA, and I did an analysis of, what are these artists charging? Because if I'm getting my work into these shows, then my work is also commensurate to the people that are getting in the show. And I needed my prices to be things that were appealing to galleries and were on par with what my peers, air quote, were charging. And at the time, and this was probably 13 years ago, I did a sort of, and I know this is kind of wonky, but I hope it informs your artist. I did sort of a mean, median, and mode of, what are people charging? And did it vary if it was a woman artist or a male artist, if it was a portrait figurative piece versus a landscape still life? And what I found was that it was around, and I did it, on the square inch. And at the time it was around $8 was the average, a square inch. And so that's where I put my prices. And then my prices have increased since then. And I also, as a woman, I wanted to be fair to myself and to the market and not underprice my work. And, and then occasionally, we just paint a darling, and those darlings will be on the higher end of my price scale, because I know that if I sell it, then they got a very good piece. But if I don't sell it, I can enter that into some competitions, and it might serve me beyond just its original painting. So that was sort of a long-winded answer to that. And then if I can also just say, I'm speaking primarily to women artists here. LinkedIn did a survey of 150 job applicants, and the data showed a lot of different things. And one of the things that came out of that data was that women needed to consider themselves about 100% qualified to apply for a job, and men about 60%. And I read that, and I was like, oh my, wow. And what I would like to say to us women artists is that we need to put ourselves out there, and we need to know that about ourselves, that in aggregate, that we are sort of getting in our own way when you feel like you have to be 100% qualified before you start putting yourself out there. And, yes, be clear-eyed about where we are and what our work is, but put yourself out there. And then also along the lines, as my children began to start doing things in the art world, my son's done some really large mural type work that are, sort of advertising based, and my daughter does digital things. And I would say, don't undersell yourself. Don't give it away for free. And I think that allowed them to sort of get out there and think about their work product from my learning experience too. So.
Yeah, that really leads me on to my next question, because, the purpose of this podcast is to promote female artists, and hopefully, when you stop the someone in the street and you ask them if they could name their favorite artist, they will start to be thinking about female artists, contemporary as well as historically, because historically, the first things that come to mind are male artists. And you've mentioned a number of artists already. A lot of those were male. So one of the things we're going to do at the end of this is have you tag a number of women who have inspired you, have encouraged you, and whose work you admire, so as to, just to tag other women so we increase that exposure along the way, Suzie. But let me come back to the question to follow up on what you've just said. Is I'm curious then where you are as a painter and as a teacher now, how you define success.
Oh gosh, that's such a large question. If I may, let me back up just a little bit to the historic situation of women artists, and both observationally what I think is happening in the U.S. right now, and then what is happening with an organization like Oil Painters of America. So historically, Linda Nochlin wrote this great essay for Art News in the 70s called, Why Are There No Great Women Painters? And it was, of course, controversial when it came out in the 70s. It was sort of reprised before her death in the, I think probably in the, in the new millennium. And some of her assertions still apply. And it's not all what we think. That it's all based on misogyny, and some of it, but one of the things is that if Michelangelo had been born a woman, he would not be Michelangelo, because he would not have had the opportunities available to him as a woman. So that was one of the things. Fast forward to the Me Too movement, to what is happening now in museums. And I was just at the Gibbs Museum in Charleston, and you see museums recognizing people of color, women artists, and you hear their names more, and you see them on the wall more and more, and you see them recognizing this sort of mistake that has been made, quite honestly, throughout history, of the lack of women representation, whether that be in music and writing and arts, in the boardrooms, and that is beginning to change in a very positive way for women, but also just for humanity writ large. We are we are not us and them. And so supporting one another and, recognizing those artists of color, women artists, outsider artists, and celebrating that is just a great opportunity, to raise the tide for all boats, including, historical male artists and my peers. Now, not all women painters, not all painters, full stop, want to be professional. There is a lot of satisfaction that we get from just painting, and you want to do it for your enjoyment. And that's great.
Yeah. There's so many women, of course, that are doing it as a hobby. But I want to come back, if I may, to the question of success as a professional yourself. How do you measure and define success as an artist, not as a teacher, but just as an artist in your artistic career?
Well, from the personal standpoint, I want to be happy with my work, and I want my work product to be something that I am pleased with and I am satisfied with. I started a painting in Florida last week that started with, a lot of enthusiasm, but did not finish to my satisfaction. So I did not put that in a frame. So from that standpoint, from the micro standpoint of, am I happy with my painting? There's that. there is the aspect of I am putting my work in front of people, and the satisfaction when someone sees my work and buys my work and comes back to me and says, I have my coffee and I look at that work, since I bought it last year, and it just brings me great joy. Like that to me brings me great satisfaction. And then of course there's the financial standpoint of it. Like I can keep doing what I'm doing. I can buy my art supplies. I can build my studio. I can make a living doing this. So there is certainly the financial aspect of it too. And then, as an artist, because people buy me the way they buy my work, there is the notoriety aspect of it too. So it's a many-legged stool, probably more than three, that for me would define success. But I think my internal headspace success, am I happy with this painting? Am I progressing to my own satisfaction as an artist, is first and foremost. And sort of my case in point is that when I do a plein air event, what I have learned is that if I sell one painting, if I paint, 10 to 13 paintings and sell one or sell 7 or sell all 13, if I concern myself with, am I doing good paintings, then that is all I'm worried about, because I know that if I do a good painting, I will sell it eventually somewhere. I mean, it's always better to sell it at the event, because that, they have done a lot of work to bring me in, and I am raising money for whether it be the Sheridan Opera House in Telluride or the Avalon Foundation in Easton, Maryland, or the fundraiser in Port St. Joe that raises money for at-risk kids in Forgotten Coast, then I am making money and they are making money as well. So I always would love to sell it, at that event or the gallery that is trusting me as one of their artists. But if I bring it home, then I can sell it to one of my collectors, to somebody that takes a workshop, or send it to one of my galleries, and that's good too. But I just concern myself with, is it a good painting? Am I satisfied with that painting?
Okay, I've got some quick fire questions for you to wrap up, Suzie. Just some quick fire ones, because we would love to know, say if you were in an elevator and you were telling somebody that you're an artist and they knew nothing about art, and they asked you how you would describe your art, what would you say?
I am a representational oil painter. Let's see, I have to describe it in a way to people that don't know art. I am a representational oil painter, and then I might show on my website because it's right there. It's interesting. So I know these are rapid fire, but we get that question a lot. And, what do you do? And I'll say I'm an artist. And you get this sort of like, oh, sure you are, nod, And then you show them your website and they're like, oh, you're an artist,
So you're at an opening and no one recognizes you, and you happen to eavesdrop on a conversation of people looking at a piece of your work. What would you like to hear about? What do you like to hear about your art?
I love to hear their emotional response to my piece. That it inspires them as an artist, or it brings them a connection that is more about their heart than their head, because they respond to that sense of place or that sense of light that they see. That's what I would love to hear.
Right. Putting you back in the elevator, what would be your advice to? There's a group of women around you, and they all aspire to paint one day. What's your pitch? What's your advice to them before they jump off the elevator? Okay,
that's easy, because this was advice given to me by a mentor who was given it to him by his mentor, Bart Lindstrom. making it in this business is a 2-step process. Step 1 is get good. Step 2 is get out there. And the better you are at step 1, the better step 2 goes.
I love that. I love it.
Yeah.
That's great. That's great. All right. We're going to ask you to tag a number of female artists. I mentioned this to you before we hit record this morning, Suzie. And if you want to reel off a few now, that's fine. But I know that you're going to send me that list so that we can tag them in social media with the show notes when we put this episode out, because we do want to widen this net. And some of those may come on the show, and I will invite them to be on the show as well. So if you want to name a few, that's fine, or you can send them to me.
Yeah, let me tell you a few. And these are all great women artists that you should know. Hashtag Amy Erickson, who just came out with a book of plein techniques. You can get it on Amazon in your mailbox in 3 days. It's fantastic. Hashtag Jane Hunt, who has 100,000 followers on Instagram. Hashtag Kathleen Hudson, who is a young mom painter, fabulously popular artist who's about to give birth to twins, but is figuring out how to be a painter and a mom at the same time. Hashtag Breanne Brown, who is a watercolor artist who just won Forgotten Coast with an amazing painting of a barn with some amazing qualities, who teaches online. Hashtag Christine Lashley, whose work flies off the shelf at plein air events and Principal Gallery. Hashtag Michelle Byrne, who paints primarily in palette knife and does wonderfully expressive work, and has a video you can buy of her work, one of the most popular streamlined videos, and was one of my artist friends that went to Paris with me. I could just go on and on and on of amazing women painters.
I'm going to get the complete list from you, Suzie, and we will have some of these ladies on this podcast. So thank you very much for that. And before you go, just tell everybody how they can find you online and on social media.
I'm very easy to find. SuzieBaker.com, SuzieBaker, and then Suzie Baker basically anywhere else, Facebook, Instagram. And then sign up for my newsletter. That's how you find out about my workshops, my work. You'll wonder why I don't write enough, but if you sign up for my newsletter, you'll get my top 10 art supplies that aren't art supplies. And it's pretty humorous little write-up. And then also my friends talk about their art supplies that aren't art supplies as well. And then from there, you'll get emails from me. It should be once a month, but that keeps you informed of work that's available, galleries I'm in, shows that I'm doing.
Fantastic. Suzie, thank you so much for being a guest on this show.
Well, it's been delightful, Chris. And I know I can talk a lot, but you just kept it flowing.
Well, I hope you'll spread the word once this episode goes live, and so we can include more women and tag more women. And so I do appreciate that.
Absolutely. Yeah, get out and paint, y'all.
Thank you so much, Suzie, and good luck with the year ahead with all your commitments too.
Thank you very much.
And you can find links to Suzie's social media and her website in the show notes accompanying this episode. And since we are a very new show, this is just season 1 now, episode 6, it would help us enormously if you could leave a rating and review on iTunes. If you just have a minute, that will help us and help others to find the show. And if you would like to contact us, you can do that by emailing hollowellstudios@gmail.com. That's HOLLOWELL, studios@gmail.com. You can also follow us on Instagram at the AART Podcast. That's the AART Podcast, where you can leave comments, questions, and suggestions. And I hope you'll share this podcast too with anyone you think may be interested in the stories of women artists. Thank you for listening, and I hope you'll join me next time.